am the CEO and principal of Ubuntu Village Works. Ubuntu Village Works is an organization dedicated to creating culturally responsive healing spaces for people of the African diaspora. Now, there's a few disclaimers before I start. I only authentically can tell a story from my own perspective, right? So I do not claim to be able to speak authentically from any of the other letters. Like we talk about BIPOC, I speak as a Black woman. And my perspective comes from that as a Black woman, as a person of the African diaspora. So I just want to make sure people understand that from the front. Okay, so today, in my little tiny time I have, we'll be talking about cultural responsiveness, anti-racism, and equity in school mental health. I speak very fast naturally, so I'm going to try very hard to slow down. But if I'm speaking too fast, someone please say something. Do not be silent if I'm speaking like I'm still in the Bronx. Wait, why am I not moving? There it goes. Okay, so this presentation is going to take place in two parts. So I wanted people to understand. In this first part, we're going to be talking about history, social determinants of health, and talking about axiology and the ways that different people from different parts of the world see things differently. It's not until part two that we're going to talk about what culturally responsive anti-racist practice looks like in the classroom or in the school or in life. So we're gonna lay the foundation this time. The next time we're gonna talk about what it looks like and what you can do and where are some resources to get some additional stuff. Okay. Where I wanted to start is this chart, and it's been sent to you as a handout. There's a gentleman, Dr. Edwin Nichols, who is a psychologist. He is a personal hero of mine, and he created the philosophical aspects of cultural difference. And this was created, he initially did this work back in the 70s, and he's updated it over the years. And what he talks about is with people from different parts of the world have different axiologies or things of higher value and different ways of organically seeing the world. Now, if you look on here, he broke people down into like European, Euro-American, Africans, people of the African diaspora, Asians, and Native Americans. What I want to focus on for the time that we have is people of the African diaspora, because that's where my authentic speaking comes from. People of the African diaspora, according to axiology is the study of value, what holds the highest value. For people of the African diaspora, this axiology is member to member. People, by and large, many Black people see the highest value in relationship. The way this may manifest itself, I talk about this and people say, well, I don't know about that, but the way this manifests itself is when, and I'm speaking, this is a very specifically Black thing. If you've ever been to a family reunion and someone who doesn't know you will say, who are your people? Who's your mama? What the question that they're actually asking is, how am I connected to you? What is my relationship to you? So I could show up in Baxley, Georgia at a family reunion. I can say, I'm Yvonne's daughter, I'm Bubba's niece. And by virtue of that relationship, the capital that my mother and my uncle held people will give to me and say, girl, come on, let's eat, right? And so what it says is that people of the African diaspora are generally highly relational people. We thrive on relationships. The way a lot of times this will manifest in a classroom or in a school setting, when a teacher and a student are not, and a student, particularly a Black student, are not connecting, the student won't say, you know, they're not helping me. What they say, they don't like me. That means I don't feel that I don't have relationship with them. So, and this is very important to understand, and it undergirds everything else, because in that everything is incumbent upon relationship. Relationship is the central bedrock factor. So when we're talking about understanding cultural responsiveness, it's about an anti-racist practice. We've got to understand it all comes into the context of relationship. Now, I want to take some time to look at the historical context, because a lot of times when we're talking about, what are our children facing, we talk about the things that are happening in present day. But what we know is we carry stuff from the past. So I go back to the Ma'afa, which is a term that is used to define the transatlantic slave trade that is currently used to talk about the years of imperialism, colonialism, apartheid, and all the things that people of the African diaspora, and this is not just an American concept, anti-Blackness is a global concept and something that has been happening since the lie first got told all the way to the present day. So very quickly, this is usually a presentation by itself, but what I want us to do is take time to really understand what this has been. And I use 1619 as a documented history point, but if you look for 403 years, Black people in what is now the United States have been looking to have full citizenship. We had 246 years of chattel slavery, followed by 100 years of Jim Crow. And what we're currently in is 57 years of a fight for full inclusion. So when we look at the 403 years, that's a long time for people to have been treated as less than. That's generation after generation. And what we know about epigenetics, and the way I explain epigenetics to people is basically when your grandmother was pregnant with your mother, the eggs that created you were inside your mother's womb as a baby inside of your grandmother. So what things that your grandmother experienced transferred in utero to your mother, and by virtue of that to you before you were thought of. And it doesn't change your DNA, but it changes which switches are turned on and turned off, which things are active and inactive in you. And so if we go back to thinking about the 403 years, how many grandmothers ago these things were passed on and passed on and passed on. This is why when people say, get over in our period of enslavement, and I don't say we were slaves, we were enslaved Africans, and what we experienced was a period of enslavement. It's not who we are. It was a condition that we experienced, and language is important. When people say get over slavery, no one says to Jews to get over the Holocaust because of this same principle. So what I want us to really think about is James Baldwin had a quote: people are trapped in history and history is trapped in them. We carry many of these things in us and they manifest in our regular lives. What I tell many people is that many behaviors that you will see that people may see as maladaptive start out as ways to be protective. And many of those things particularly for Black people, many things were done and we do them, they've been carried over today. And some of them, they started from protection from white harm. So I want people to really understand that, people say, well, Black parents do this, Black parents do that. If you don't understand the history of where some behaviors come from, where some things come from, you can't speak to it. And so in understanding our history, we look at the social determinants of health, right? We talk about where people live, work, play, pray, and how all those things are affected, and play a role in how we see the world, how we move in the world, what kind of outcomes we have. But if we go back and we think about the 57 years, we know that housing, having adequate housing is is a social determinant of health. Black communities experienced redlining with serial disinvestment from communities. We had health disparities because of every manner of exclusion. There's educational inequality, income inequality, and concentrated poverty that goes back to redlining. There are food deserts, mass incarceration, and racialized trauma. What I want people, and I know that a lot of you have been through trauma-informed care training, and something that does not get talked about is collective racialized trauma, right? These are traumas that people experience, that your students experience by virtue of the fact that they are Black. And I want us to make sure that we're understanding the pool that we're swimming in, right? Because if you have a child that was, let's say, high school student, your child was born in 2004, right? Think about what our children have seen since 2004. These are children who are born in the 24-hour news cycle, born when they came out of their womb, with their mother's womb, they had a cell phone in their hand. And understand, I'm not saying this for people to feel emotion around it. James Baldwin has a quote, and I always misquote him, but they said the overexpression of emotion, the tears can equate to cruelty, because you don't see the fullness of who I am. You only see me in what I've been through. And we do not look like what we've been through. We are not just our experiences. We are full people. But I'm doing that. I want y'all to understand, because when we're talking about DEI, and we have our DEI moments and we have our DEI day, truly to be anti-racist institutions that employ on the daily basis culturally responsive practice, we've got to understand and put in our heart that this is an experience, and this experience is tied to the American experience. While all these things have happened, these are not necessarily things that if you open up any of the history books, that our children will learn, unless people take an extra time to teach them. When we look, because what society talks to us about, I know I'm staying a really long time on this slide because it's really important. What I want you all to hear is that all of these things, people within our communities did not do any of these things. We did not own banks. There are Black-owned banks, but it wasn't those institutions that decided to redline our communities and serially disinvest. And in that serial disinvestment, remember, there's lacks of banks, there's lack of healthcare, lack of all these things within our community. And when that serial disinvestment happened, that came to educational inequality, because it was white flight. And when people flee the neighborhood, so did all of the income, all of the tax base. And most of you know, education is fueled by the tax base. And I want us to really understand this, right? Rochester, New York is what is called an extractive economy. If you think about the Rochester City School District, the majority of people who work within the district do not live in the city. So all the money, they do not pay taxes in the city. People who work at many of the institutions that serve our people do not live in the city. So the police, the fire department, the school district. So all that money gets extracted, even though it's generated here in the city, it gets extracted and invested in suburban communities. And that is how we end up having a lot of the other things that we see. Risk factors are not predictive factors because of protective factors. Dr. Carl C. Bell is a recent ancestor and my intellectual man crush every day. Dr. Bell was a preeminent psychiatrist, and he believed that while all those things that we just went over are very, very, very true, they do not have to be predicted, because we, the people on this call, the people in your buildings, with the right knowledge and the right things, can be protected, so that all of the things that we talked about does not have to be the future for our children. And I wanted to make sure I left time for questions. So in our next time, we're going to talk about, how do we do that? What does that look like? How do we make this part of our daily practice, and not just, and this is no slot, this is no shade, not just at our DEI time. Because the way we do this needs to become a way of life, the way we organically experience, our children organically experience their educational world. Now, I know I went through some of this really fast, but I want to make sure I have 5 minutes for questions. Do people have any questions about what I've talked about so far?